We'd like to discuss further the mechanics of a foreign exchange market in this video. So again, let's start out with a world where we only have the US and Britain to keep things simple, so that the exchange rate that we're talking about in the foreign exchange market is the price of dollars for pounds or pounds for dollars as determined by the foreign exchange market. I talked about in another video, the foreign exchange market reflects that US buyers of UK goods, services, and assets have to supply pounds in order to get the pounds they need to complete a transaction. The same way that the private supply of pounds reflects the private demand for dollars by UK citizens buying US goods, services, and assets. You want to take a look at this familiar supply and demand curve here that we've talked about before, where we have a supply of pounds by private citizens, a demand for pounds by private citizens. In earlier video, we talked about the price of pounds sort of generically on this axis, but let's talk a little bit more about what we mean by that. This price of pounds that we're talking about with the supply and demand on these on this graph is the number of dollars it takes to buy 1 pound. It's going to be dollars divided by pounds. It's how many dollars it takes to buy 1 pound. So one way to keep this in mind is if we've got the demand for pounds, the supply of pounds, the quantity of pounds, then the thing down here in the denominator is going to be pounds. Okay, so this would be, for example, I don't know, $2 per pound. That's the exchange rate. In fact, in all of the videos that we'll be doing, I'm always going to use the exchange rate is how many dollars it takes to buy a pound or a foreign currency. It's always dollars per foreign currency. Now, sometimes people get confused about exchange rates, and they might use pounds per dollars instead. Now, this exchange rate expressed this way, how many pounds it takes to buy a dollar. If it takes $2 to buy a pound, it's going to take only 50 pence to buy a dollar. It's the inverse. But it does very much make a difference what you put over on this axis, because 2 pounds per dollar is not the same thing as $2 per pound. So make sure that you get that right. Now, again, so let's think about this exchange rate of $2 per pound, and we want to say, well, how much if some British good costs 100 pounds, how does that convert to dollars? So you're basically saying, well, at this intersection of supply and demand, if you've got a $100 pound item, how many dollars does it take? So what we do, we take this and we convert it to dollars using the exchange rate. Okay, we want to end up with dollars, so I'm going to multiply $2 over pounds. The pounds cancel, these units cancel, and what we're left with is a 100 pound good is the equivalent of $200 at this exchange rate. Now, let me again emphasize this, how it's important to get the units right. Let's say that if we used instead, well, the easier one to do is, okay, how much does a $100 good cost in terms of pounds? Sometimes people will say, well, I just multiplied this times the exchange rate. That's what we did up here. So, okay, let's do this mechanically. So, what we have here is that if you try and convert the $100 into pounds using this multiplication, what you're left with is 200, okay, dollars squared over pounds. Now, that may mean something to you, but it doesn't mean a thing to me. There's clearly something wrong here. So when you do the conversions, and this in everyday life, this is the same way. If you go overseas and you try and use the exchange rate, it's important that you get the right, you multiply times the right by the right exchange rate. Okay, so in this case, we want to multiply pounds over dollars, okay, in order to have the dollars cancel. This exchange rate is the same thing as pounds, 1 pound over $2. The dollars cancel, and what we're left with is that at this exchange rate, $100 is worth 50 pounds. Bottom line here is that when we depict this graphically, we're going to put E, the price of pounds. It's the number of dollars per pound, the intersection of the supply and demand curve. That intersection will determine the exchange rate and will then give us the conversion factor of changing one currency into another. So, if we had this $2 per pound, and for example, there is let's say an increase in the supply of pounds by private citizens. Maybe that's a private supply of pounds. There are more UK citizens that want to buy US goods. That would be an increase in the supply of pounds. At the original exchange rate, there's an excess supply of pounds. It's an excess supply of this thing, and so the price needs to drop. This temporary excess supply of pounds will result in a drop in the price of pounds to say $1.50. Now that number is just pulled out of the air, but the increase in the supply of pounds causes the pound to depreciate. 1 pound now buys only $1.50 rather than $2. Now, what does that do to the price of US goods? This pound depreciation. That same $100 will cost more than the 50 pounds that we had originally. So that, for example, actually let's make this even simpler. Just let's say that this dropped to $1 per pound. Okay, still a pound depreciation. Now, for this same good, for this same $100 import, it's going to cost twice as much. So this is something that we're going to see later in the course, that a depreciation of a currency tends to raise the price of imports into a country and have inflationary impact. Okay, so that's again a little bit more about the mechanics of a foreign exchange market, with particular attention to the units that we want to use for a foreign exchange market, and to be very, very clear about that. And actually, I should probably just finish up by looking at the reverse, just to be clear about this. Now, I'm generally going to look at this from the standpoint of the pound, but if we had the supply and demand for dollars, okay, we've got dollars, we've got dollars, we've got dollars, then we're going to have pound over dollars in this depiction. This is the price of dollars. It's how many pounds it takes to buy a dollar. And just maybe to finally solidify this, let's say that we had quantity of pounds of beef. We had the supply of pounds of beef. We had the demands of pounds of beef. That's going to be how many dollars it takes per pound of beef. And what you see here is that the thing in the denominator here is what's on this graph and over here. The same way here, if we've got a supply of dollars, it's going to be in the denominator here. Okay, so keep this in mind as we go forward, because it's going to be very important not to have the wrong exchange rate listed on the axis when we're manipulating these curves.